So the other thing that Ontario, I think, has really understood is that renewable energy is a booming industry globally. Last year in 2008, it was a $140 billion industry. Wind energy, this is renewable energy in general, but wind energy by itself is expected to be a $1 trillion industry by the year 2020. Germany has 90,000 people employed in wind energy alone. The United States has 80,000 people employed in wind energy. There's 80,000 coal miners in the United States, so there's currently more people in the wind energy industry than there is in coal miners in the United States. So this is a real industry, this is a big industry. The point that I often make is I'm one of the last guys with a ponytail left in the industry. There's a lot more lawyers walking around at these conferences than there are hippies now. So, as I said, this industry has been growing at about 20 to 30% per year for the last, really for the last 10 years, but you can really see that it's really sort of come of age in the last 5 years. Things have really, really seriously changed in the last just 3 or 4 to 5 years. So I think that's important to know, that what you may have thought about renewables even 4 or 5 years ago is really out of date compared to what's going on now. Things are changing really, really quickly. One of the reasons when we talk about wind energy, or when we talk about renewable energy, we often talk, wind energy kind of hogs the show a lot. And one of the reasons is that wind energy makes up about half of the investment in renewable energy right now. And so solar is, if you were to take that graph and sort of move solar about 10 years back, you can see solar is about 10 years behind wind. And I think that's really exciting. I think solar is really about to hit stride, and most people predict solar is going to take over wind energy in the very near future. But as I said, it was a $140 billion industry in 2008. And what that meant was that wind energy, or renewable energy, not just wind energy, but solar, wind, and other renewables, took more investment in 2008 than coal, natural gas, and nuclear power combined. So 2008 was the first year that renewable energy actually took more investment than any other type of electricity. And they're expecting 2009 actually to be a slower year, relatively speaking, but they're still expecting it to be a growth year. NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and their job is basically to keep the lights on in North America. They're not an advocacy organization. They're not out to promote one technology over another. Their job is to make sure the lights stay on, to make sure the grid is reliable by the very nature of their name, the Reliability Corporation. In their 2008 forecast, they were predicting, you can see the numbers, they're predicting 145,000 megawatts of wind energy development versus about 9,000 megawatts of solar or nuclear power development. So you can see really where the market is going. And again, this is a corporation whose job is just to manage the grid, and so they're looking at this in terms of what they have to plan for. These numbers are prior to President Obama becoming elected, and so if anything, that is a radical under-assumption because Obama has invested big dollars in renewable power. And so here's a quote from the Premier of Ontario: "We need to move from a culture of consumption to a culture of consumption to a culture of conservation." And so I think it's pretty clear to see that this is really permeated to the top levels of the government, that they actually get what we've been talking about for many years. So how did this happen? Where did this come from? And this might seem rather surprising in terms of that someone has actually taken the bull by the horns. And so I'm proud to say that we were part of the Green Energy Act Alliance, which got together about 2 or 3 years ago and really pushed hard for a Green Energy Act. And there's a web page called the Green Energy Act Alliance, or greenenergyact.ca, and all the information is there in terms of what was being asked for and what the Alliance was really pushing for in terms of what would make a good feed-in tariff or what would make a progressive renewable energy law. And I think you can see what's interesting about this group that came together was it was a diverse group. We obviously had your NGOs, but there was First Nations that came on board, and there was agricultural groups that came on board, and then this was sort of the founding members, and ultimately there was about 30 different groups that came on board. But it was really that broad range of, and then steelworkers also came on board. And so you had the unions, you had farmers, you had First Nations, you had environmental groups. And so this was a broad coalition of Ontario society calling for, this is what we want to do. Ontario had put in what's called the standard offer contracts. And so they had in 2006, they had initiated sort of a baby feed-in tariff, I guess. And it was a lot less progressive than the current one. And what they did in that one, they gave 42 cents per kilowatt hour for solar, which is still generous, and 11 cents for all other technologies. And I think what's different about the feed-in tariff now compared to the previous standard offer contract was they differentiated for all the different types of renewable technologies. And And so this was the original plan that they'd put in place, and this was kind of a baby sort of first step into encouraging renewable energy in Ontario. And when they originally launched this standard offer contract, they had anticipated about 1,000 megawatts of development in 10 years. They got that in the first year of the program, and they got so much uptake and so much excitement about this program, they actually had to shut it down in the first year because there was more people than they anticipated. And so instead of shutting it down, though, the Minister of Energy, George Smitherman, said, we can actually do better. How can we retool this to do better? And so I think that's an important lesson, that really a lot of the credit to what's going on in Ontario comes down to the political leadership of individuals like Dalton McGuinty and George Smitherman, who really pushed for this. Another interesting point is that one of the reasons that this was possible in Ontario was a couple of things happened. And one, and this is sort of difficult to read, but what this is, the bottom line here is the actual power demand in Ontario over the since 1975. And so in the mid-80s, this was the Ontario Power Authority's prediction of where power was going to go. It was just a nice straight line. And what's actually happened is sort of in the mid-90s, they were able to flatten off the demand for electricity in Ontario. A lot of that came from conservation through energy efficiency improvements. Obviously, there was some growth, but they really were able to flatten off their electricity demand. But what happened recently is it's actually started to decline, and a lot of that has to do with energy efficiency gains, and some of that has to do with some of the loss in manufacturing. But what happened here was, because the energy demand is actually in decline in Ontario right now, is it bought them a little bit of time. And so I think that they were able to push some of this legislation through, knowing that they had a bit of time to do it. But what's important, one of the important points I want to drive home here today is that this is what the Power Authority thought the demand was going to be in the mid-80s. This was the line they drew, and they were clearly wrong. And just keep that in mind when we get for a couple of slides later. But again, one of the reasons that Ontario really was able to do this is that renewable is doable, and it really is possible now. And I think that's truer now than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. But there also was this commitment to shutting down the coal plants in Ontario, and this is the Nanticoke. This is one of the largest single sources of smog and of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, and that's one of the plants they're going to be shutting down. But it's not just McGuinty that gets this. As I said, this is a quote from the President of the United States. A green and renewable energy economy isn't some pie-in-the-sky far-off future. It is now, and it's creating jobs now, and it can create millions of additional jobs in an entire new industry if we act now. And I think that's important to recognize, because this is our largest trading partner who is really taking renewable energy seriously. In fact, I don't have it here, but it's on our webpage. If you compare the American stimulus package to the Canadian federal stimulus package in 2009, on a per capita basis, not an absolute basis, but a per capita basis, the Americans are outspending us 14-1 on renewable energy investment in the most recent budgets. So they are taking it very seriously. There's a huge industry that's happening just south of the border, and I think it behooves us as Canadians to be aware of that.